Coming soon to own on
YouTube and
DVD.
Twitch. Serial killers that are still on the loose today, part 2. I don't know if I watched part 1 or didn't post it yet. Can't remember. But I don't think I'm going to be watching part 1. So let's get straight into it.
Serial killers that are still on the loose. Wow, you guys really loved part 1 to this series. The first video I made about a month ago had literally 1 million views in 2 days and over 2 million views in the first week. Safe to say you guys are interested in serial killers that are on the loose. And
Very
unfortunately,
much
there's
so.
still more to discuss.
This
So
shit
buckle up.
crazy.
In case you didn't watch the first part of the series, don't worry. Let me get you up to speed. According to the FBI, there could be up to 50 active serial killers on the loose.
Wow. I always wondered like what makes the difference between a mass killer, like a mass murder versus a serial killer versus like a gang related murderer. I don't know.
In the United States at any given moment. And I think it's important to make that distinction because being on the loose and being active are two different things, which is why this video is a bit of a double feature. I'm going to start by discussing every serial killer that is currently walking among us, and then I'm going to end the video with not only killers that are on the loose, but killers that are on the loose and active to this very day. But without further
Oh,
ado,
shit.
let's get to this part 2 of killers that could technically kill you. The Texas Killing Fields. The year is 1977, and it's a hot Texas night in the middle of July. You are heading back home after an evening of spending time with your friends, when you decide to pull into a gas station and top up your tank and grab a drink. Once you get back to your vehicle, it's not unlocking, and you notice that your keys are on the driver's seat. This
Come on, bro. How do you lock yourself out your car at night?
was a common mistake that you've made numerous times before. However, they've never had quite the same outcome. Knowing what to do in this situation, you decide to call your boyfriend, and you find the nearest outdoor payphone, which luckily was only a few feet away, on site at the gas station. As you head over to the payphone, you notice a car pulling into the gas station, but it's not pulling into a bay to collect gasoline. It's pulling up right beside you. Before you're even able to take the phone off the hook, you notice the person in this vehicle asking if you need some help. You politely decline, but tell them you appreciate the offer. The man in the truck almost over-enthusiastically insists that it's not an issue. This man tells you to just get into his truck and he'll drive you the few feet back to your car. He'll park his truck and he'll get all the tools out necessary to help you get your keys out of your car.
Fuck no.
Reluctantly, you accept the help because you know it's late and your boyfriend is a few miles away. Although, as soon as you get into this man's truck, the demeanor changes, and unfortunately, you would never be seen again. Well, that is, at least for 18 years, because it
God.
wouldn't be until March of 2016 when your remains would finally be found. The story
March of 2016? Yo, that's 20 plus years of your body never being found. Come
you just
on.
heard is based on the reality of one of the many victims of the Texas Killing Fields. This story specifically was based on what happened to Kelly Ann Cox, a 20-year-old woman who went missing on July 15th in 1997 at a Conoco gas station and wasn't found until March 15th, 2016, when investigators were brought to her remains. This extremely upsetting and disturbing story I just told was unfortunately not rare for the Texas Killing Fields, and the series of events that took place in this situation are extremely consistent with almost every murder that took place. Now, if you're a keen listener, obviously the Texas Killing Fields isn't a person, it's a location. And that's because the Texas Killing Fields isn't just associated with one serial killer. It's actually associated with numerous serial killers, all of which we'll get into. But
Yo, what they got going on over there?
first, let's further discuss this area of Texas as a whole. The Texas Killing Fields is a nickname that was given to an area of land surrounding the I-45 highway, which is located in southeast Houston, Texas. I know we started the first Killers on the Loose video with the I-75 killer, which may seem similar at face value, but understand that the I-75 killer was only one individual and his murders took place all across the country. And the Killing Fields is rather a stark contrast, because although all of the Texas Killing Field killings took place near the I-45 highway, the actual area where the bodies were found was extremely compact, specifically being a 25
And nobody found nothing till 2016. Gang, like I know this is an over the top shot, but this is a 5-mile distance from here. This is like 200 feet distance. This is like a 2-mile distance. 2 miles, a mile of bodies being found within each other, literally in the same quadrant.
acre patch of land in League City, Texas. And it's in this patch of land where over 34 bodies have been found since the 1970s.
And nobody put a stop to this?
And as I stated previously, it's not only suspected, but confirmed that numerous serial killers have been active in this rather confined area. Now, focusing in on this area for a second, what makes this area so special? Is there something in the water that's just causing these Texas residents to begin killing, or is there more to it? And while it hasn't officially been confirmed, authorities who have been working the case for decades now have more or less come to the conclusion that the Texas killing fields are a perfect place to kill somebody and get away with it, which is a terrifying quote to hear from law enforcement. But to further drive this point home, Amy Mann, who actually directed the Texas Killing Fields movie in 2011, said this about the Killing Fields patch of land. Quote, "You could actually see the refineries in the south end of League City. You could see the I-45. But if you yelled, no one would necessarily hear you. And if you ran, you wouldn't necessarily have anywhere to go." And that quote alone kind of highlights how there are two major landmarks in the Killing Fields. However, neither of them are extremely helpful for somebody who's being victimized in between the two.
Yeah, that's nothing but straight land, bro. Hey, you start screaming, people are driving on the highway. Nobody's really gonna hear that.
And because of this, if you are somebody who is traveling in this area alone, you are unfortunately vulnerable. And while the Texas Killing Fields may be in a bit of a unique geographical location, this part of Houston isn't the only part of the country that's like this. So part of me feels like there's more to it. But honestly, that's just speculation. Focusing back in on the victims of the Texas Killing Fields, as of right now, at least 34 bodies have been recovered in this 25-acre patch of land. And these murders have been happening as early as the 1970s and as recently as the late 2000s. And if you watched part 1 or watched basically any true crime at all, then you can probably theorize on who was the primary target of the Texas Killing Fields. The victims were, of course, young women, with a majority of these women not being women at all, but literally being children, with some of the victims being girls as young as 12 years old. However, with at least 34 murders taking place in a 25-acre patch of land in a time frame that spans over 50 years, the vast majority of the murders that took place in the Killing Fields are still unsolved to this day. However, that doesn't mean that none have been solved. And I am now going to discuss the unfortunately small number of convictions that have taken place so far. The first conviction involves Clyde Edwin Hedrick. He was investigated for the suspicious death of Ellen Beeson. During this investigation, he admitted that he and her had both gone swimming in a nearby lake after leaving a local bar, and he stated that while they were swimming, she accidentally drowned in the water. But he also claimed that he only hid her body because he was scared of being accused for foul play, which I think we can both instantly see through. But unfortunately, at the time, no cause of death could be ascertained. And because of that, in 1996, already 11 years after the murder took place, Hedrick was convicted of abusing a corpse and was sentenced to only 1 year of jail. Now, if the story only ended there, it would be unfair of me to call that a murder, because legally, he was only tampering with a body, which is, well, already disgusting. But of course, the story does not end there. In 2011, Hedrick's ex-wife approached authorities and said that her ex-husband would frequently make incriminating remarks about Beeson's death. And it was this information, along with a second autopsy of Beeson's body, that resulted in authorities getting an arrest warrant that eventually resulted in charges against Hedrick in 2014. Hedrick was officially convicted of manslaughter and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. However, he was released in 2021, and today—
For what? For what?
Walks among us. Everything I've stated so far is a fact, but if we're willing to dive into a bit of speculation, it's been alleged that Hedrick made 2 jailhouse confessions during his time in prison. And according to these confessions, he claimed to have murdered 2 other women without ever being caught, making this conviction that much more unsatisfying. The second—
And he got released. He got released. Oh my God.
Confessions associated with the Texas Killing Fields come from 1987, when a 30-year-old man named Robert King called the El Paso police, claiming that a year prior in 1986, him and his friend attacked, assaulted, and murdered a young woman named Shelly Sykes. These men were promptly arrested, and they made a deal with authorities that if they could show the police where the body was, they would avoid life sentences. However, during the investigation, they were unable to uncover the body. And because of this, these 2 men were only convicted of aggravated kidnapping, but still received life sentences in 1998. These 2 men, while obviously monsters, are no longer an issue, because both of these men had died behind bars, one in 2015 and one in 2020. The third conviction involves a man named Kevin Smith. In In 1996, a 13-year-old girl named Crystal Baker left her grandmother's house to go use a payphone to call her friend to ask her friend if she could stay over. And during her trip from her grandmother's house to the payphone, she was picked up, assaulted, murdered, and dumped, and her body was only found 2 hours later. However, although her body was only found 2 hours after the incident took place, it would take 16 years for justice to be served. And that's because in 2009, Kevin Smith was arrested on a drug charge in Louisiana. And around that
Making
same
us
time,
look bad,
DNA
bro.
evidence from Baker's dress was also being analyzed. And with both of these investigations taking place at the same time, a connection between the two was made. And
Like, this nigga really making us look bad. Like, why the fuck are you touching? Like, why are you doing this to a fucking child, bro? You're black. Like, you can't be making us look crazy.
in 2012, Smith was found guilty of capital murder, where he is currently spending a life sentence in prison. And the final conviction associated with the Texas killing fields involves William Lewis Reese. In May of 1997, Reese was arrested for kidnapping and attempting to murder a 19-year-old girl. During this kidnapping, this woman was fortunately able to escape, and he was found and convicted and sentenced to a 60-year prison term. During his time in prison, in 2015, his DNA was linked to another murder that took place in 1997, the same year he kidnapped the victim we just spoke about. After this connection was made and the metaphorical cat was out of the bag, Reese confessed to 4 additional murders and was sentenced to death. On top of all of these 4 convictions that took place, there was also an additional 3 suspects that were very likely involved with some of the murders but were never charged. Now, to bring the Texas killing fields back to the original point of this video, as you can see, with only 4 convictions taking place, with a total of 7 confirmed murders within those 4 convictions, that still leaves 27 unsolved murders that have taken place in the Texas killing fields. Meaning that it is an undeniable fact that there are multiple killers and likely serial killers that are on the loose who have actively participated in the atrocities of the Texas killing fields and were never caught. I know this first section was a bit longer than normal, but this story truly has so much depth, and I wanted to bring some of that to light. The Monster of Florence. The year is 1985. You are an Italian man in your early 20s. The girl that you've been seeing at school has finally agreed to go out with you, and tonight was the big night. It's a warm September's evening, and you go to pick her up at her house, and you plan on taking her to a place that was private and secluded, so both of you could have a conversation and potentially more in peace. After a long but pleasant drive down a dirt road, you get to your destination, and you and your date begin to discuss life.
But like, why a dirt road? Like, if you was trying to crush, you could have just went to an empty parking lot.
School, career paths, and you both are really hitting it off. Even though this moment has been something you've been dreaming of, something feels off. You know you're alone, but for some reason, you feel like you're being watched. Your date begins to kiss you, but for some reason you just can't seem to put your guard down. But you ultimately give in. Finally submitting to the moment, you find yourself hearing a branch crack, and you quickly look around. Your date tells you it's nothing and pulls your face closer to hers, and you both continue what you were doing. That is, until you hear a knock on the window of your car. Your date screams, and you are in shock. There is a man pointing a .22 caliber pistol directly at you and your date. One of the best days of your life has quickly turned into one.
I hope you left that car on, nigga. I'm out of there, nigga. Foot on the gas.
The worst. And before you could even process the situation, you and your date were murdered. The story that I just told is the unfortunate reality of many of the victims of the Monster of Florence. The Monster of Florence was notorious for numerous reasons, but most notably the sheer depravity of his actions and also the interesting victim selection that he had. As I alluded to in the intro story, the Monster of Florence almost exclusively targeted young couples seeking private, intimate moments, which was something that historically was almost never seen before. The murders themselves primarily took place in the province of Florence, Italy, and within those 2 decades, 8 couples were murdered, resulting in...
But it's like, bro, why are you going out there, though? There's so many other places you could have went. But besides probably... Oh shit, my cup. Besides probably these two gay dudes, I could probably understand like why they was trying to hide, because you know that was like the 80s, like before that was really acceptable. But like, come on, bro. Everybody else, there's so many other places y'all could have went.
a total of 16 victims. As I previously stated, all the victims were couples, and all of them were in rural areas, typically attacked during intimate moments. But on top of this, the methods of murder in every instance and the aftermath was also the exact same and genuinely disturbing. What the Monster of Florence would do in nearly every murder is execute both of the partners typically in their vehicle with a .22 caliber pistol, and then after both of the victims were dead, the killer would then go on to mutilate the female victim with a knife. The final consistencies that took place across almost all of the murders was that the murders took place on Saturdays, typically during a new moon, when the moon was not visible in the sky. For the 2 decades that the Monster of Florence was active, he not only terrorized Italy with his actions, but was also actively taunting law enforcement, similar to situations we've seen with other killers, like the Zodiac Killer. One of the most notable communications that the Monster of Florence had with authorities was when the Monster of Florence literally mailed a letter to the district attorney working the case, and attached to this letter was a plastic bag that contained flesh from the chest of one of the last known female victims. And it was since that communication in 1985 when the Monster of Florence had gone silent. With nearly 20 years of terror and 16 victims, there has to be some
This nigga
information about the
retired.
murder. And well, there is. But similar to the last case we discussed, the information is spotty at best. And even though convictions have been made, the most popular theory surrounding the entire Monster of Florence situation was that the true killer was never caught and is very likely on the loose to this very day. The most notable conviction was actually overturned 2 years later due to police planting evidence on somebody, and before this individual could have a retrial, he died. And his 2 alleged conspirators were only convicted of 4 of the 8 murders. Admittedly, that summary is a rather large oversimplification of the entire conviction situation. But to spare this section from being as long as the first one, just understand that the only prime suspect that authorities ever had was convicted of 7 of the 8 double murders, only to be appealed 2 years later because it was found out that the police literally planted evidence at his home, and even though this conviction was appealed, this individual died before he could have a retrial, meaning that already there are so many unanswered questions.
So
And
even
as
if
I
it
stated,
was him,
his
he
2 alleged
died.
co-conspirators were officially convicted of 4 of the 8 double murders, but that still means that there are 4 other double murders that took place with no suspect ever caught and brought to justice. Some people believe that Pajani, the original prime suspect, was actually the Monster of Florence, while others believe that the Monster of Florence was actually not one person but the acts of a murder cult that existed in Florence. And I think one of the most popular beliefs was that the
But why it gotta be a cult? Why it gotta be a cult though? Like, deranged niggas can't just kill niggas as a group? Everything gotta be a cult. Oh.
true Monster of Florence was somebody that was not on the radar of authorities at all. They were an elusive shut-in who was skilled and methodical and knew how to stay away from the spotlight. Regardless of which theory you believe, the undeniable consistency among all of them is that the true Monster of Florence was never caught. And although some of these murders date all the way back to 1968, there is still a likely chance that the Monster of Florence, or at least one of the Monsters of Florence, is still on the loose to this very day. The Monster of the Andes. Since we're already
Andes.
discussing monsters from other parts of the world, I figured Pedro Lopez, the Monster of the Andes, would be the perfect next entry for
So
this
where's
list.
this one at?
Unintentionally, part 1 of this series was pretty US heavy, so for that reason, I tried to make part 2 a bit more international. But with that being said, let's focus back in on the Monster of the Andes. The Monster
Where's the Andes? I don't know, like geological bull.
of the Andes was the nickname given to Pedro Lopez, a Colombian serial killer with probably one of
Colombia.
the most insane stories you've ever heard. Pedro Lopez was born in 1948 and committed his first
God
murder in
damn.
1969. Over the course of 1969 to 1980, Pedro Lopez assaulted and killed anywhere from 110 to over 300
Yo!
victims. Most of his victims, unsurprisingly and disturbingly, were young girls. And he committed these atrocities in Colombia,
sad.
Ecuador, and Peru. Now, stating that these murders took place from 1969 to 1980 is a bit deceptive, because although the first murders that Pedro Lopez committed was in 1969, it would be the only murders he would commit until he was released from prison in 1978. And if you're following
Wow.
along, yes, Pedro Lopez's first murders actually took place in jail. In 1969, Pedro Lopez was sentenced to 7 years in prison for stealing a car. And after only 2 days in jail, he was assaulted by 4 men in that prison, and instead of reporting this crime, he decided to kill all 4 of these men with a makeshift knife. These murders were deemed
Wow.
self-defense, but it still added 2 years onto his prison sentence. And it wasn't until 1978 when he was a free man once again and decided to begin killing innocent people. From 1978 to 1980, Pedro himself confirmed that he killed over 100 girls. And these girls were primarily street children that came from indigenous tribes, meaning that they were largely unverifiable. And it was that fact alone that allowed him to get away with such heinous acts for so long. It's insane to just think that somebody was able to kill over 100 people in only a 2-year span. That is on average a murder per week consistently for years. Now, here's the deal. At this point, you might be asking yourself, obviously there's no way that this man is on the loose today if we know who he is, and there is reports of him being in, well, at least the zeitgeist of authorities. But that is unfortunately where things take a turn. You see, early on in Pedro's killing spree, he was active in Peru, and he was actually captured by a Peruvian tribe when he was trying to steal a child. The local tribesmen literally tried to kill Pedro by burying him in sand, pouring syrup on his face, and allowing ants to get at him. But an American missionary convinced the tribe that instead of murdering Pedro,
Come on, bro.
they should allow the American missionary to take him to the police. And reluctantly, they agreed. But unfortunately, this missionary took Pedro to the authorities, and the authorities did not detain Lopez. They simply banned him from the country. And after Pedro was banned from Peru, he continued his killing spree in Ecuador. And it wasn't long until Pedro was once again caught trying to steal a child from a village. But this time, the people were able to detain him until police arrived. And once police arrived, he was this time actually arrested. And during his interrogation, he began to talk. As I stated earlier, during this interrogation, Pedro admitted to killing over 100 girls, but at first the police simply didn't believe him. That was until Pedro was able to bring the authorities to the remains of 53 of his victims. When at that point, the police obviously believed that they had a true insane monster in their hands. It's even stated that Pedro tried his best to take the innocence of as many children as possible, because he said that the same thing happened to him as a boy, which only further shows the depravity of this insane individual. Even though when in police custody, Pedro admitted to the murder of at least 350 girls. During his trial, Pedro was only charged with the murder of 57 and found guilty for the murder of 3, which I have no idea how you can literally...
Hold on. Who is this nigga's lawyers? He has 300 kills. He's only being charged for 57 of them and was only found guilty for 3 bodies. He showed the police 53 dead bodies and was only charged for 3. Who is this nigga's lawyer?
say you killed someone, take the police to their bodies, and not be convicted. But regardless, for these 3 murders he was found guilty of, he served a 16-year prison sentence, which was the maximum at the time, which is mind-blowing in my opinion. And from 1980 to 1994, Pedro was obviously in prison. Now, if you're asking yourself, wait, that's not 16 years, that's 14 years. You're right. He was actually let out of jail 2 years early, which only further boggles my mind. And then immediately after his release in 1994, he was committed to a mental hospital where he stayed from 1994 till 1998. Now, in case everything I'd mentioned was just truly not disturbing and disgusting and upsetting enough, things are about to get a lot worse. Because in 1998, Pedro was officially released from the mental hospital, and as of 1999, Pedro has officially disappeared and has not been spotted anywhere by anyone.
Oh my
and
gosh.
although legally speaking, Pedro did serve his time and was no longer a fugitive, the fact that he's out of prison blows my mind. But the fact that he was let out of prison and was not tracked or followed or anything blows my mind even further. But
I feel like the fact that he showed the police 53 dead bodies of little girls, and then they only charged him with the murder of 3 of them. Like, what the fuck?
the reality of the situation is this. Pedro Lopez, a man who self-confessed killed over 350 young girls in a 2-year span, nearly 1 murder every other day, was only found guilty on 3 counts of murder, and for the last 26 years has been completely off the grid, and his whereabouts are, well, unknown. I don't know about you, but if somebody goes on a mass killing spree of children with the sole goal of taking their innocence, I don't think anything is going to stop them. Which is why it's an undeniable fact that Pedro Lopez is on the loose to this day. But it's also my personal opinion that he's likely active, even though he is currently 77 years old. If you're a big true crime fan, then shady or shoddy police work is definitely not something that you're unaware of. But in my opinion, this case is one of the most egregious examples of just poor legislation, resulting in one of the most disgusting serial killers in modern history to be served the equivalent of a slap on the wrist. And I guess speaking of serial killers that could possibly be active currently, I think this is a good point to transition from killers that are just on the loose to killers that are very likely active right now. Before
Oh
we move on
Lord,
to
here
this
we
more or
go.
less speed round of potentially currently active killers, I did just want to say that there was a lot more entries I wanted to put on this list. But as you saw in the first few sections, I went into way more detail than I initially planned on. Regardless, the point I'm trying to make is that there is a lot more on the loose, uncaught killers that I could discuss. So if you do want a part 3, leave a like on this video or comment part 3 to let me know that you would like me to continue this series. It's not a secret that YouTube does not love this sort of content, but if you guys genuinely want it, I will continue to make it. And if you haven't yet, consider subscribing. We're currently on the road to 2 million subscribers.
Oh
Let's
shit,
continue.
congratulations.
The Buffalo Bayou Killer. I think that this
Buffalo
entry is
Bayou?
one that a lot of people have been waiting for, and honestly, I was excited to cover it, so let's just dive right into it. In 2025 alone, over 24 bodies have been discovered in bayous across Houston. Notably, a large number of these bodies have been discovered in the Buffalo
Yo.
Bayou.
What is Houston again? Yo, that's twice Houston has made an appearance. And yo, what's going on in Texas? No, not even Texas. What's going on in Houston? That is the second time they're in this video for mass murder.
Specifically. Now, with so many bodies turning up in mysterious places in mysterious ways, it's not unwise to potentially question whether or not there is foul play at play. And it's this thought process that has led to multiple conspiracy theories and the entire idea of a Buffalo Bayou killer, or rather a greater Houston serial killer that is actively on the loose now. Now, candidly, I'm a bit torn in the situation, primarily because there is such little information and this is all so fresh. Like I said in the first video, serial killing investigations are typically long, drawn out, and are not solved for decades, which is why I said previously that unsolved serial cases are more or less of a retrospective game, because you need so much time and evidence to truly connect all of the dots in a meaningful way. But with that being said, what do we know about the facts? Well, basically everything I said. 24 bodies were found in bayous across Houston in 2025. People online think that there is a potential serial killer on the loose right now, and that is not necessarily a crazy idea. However, authorities, specifically Houston police, strongly dispute any claims that there are an active serial killer in Houston. The Houston police doubt there is a...
Of course, they're not going to claim there's a serial killer in the town. Because once you do that, you put your whole city in a state of panic. And now you put a time limit on how fast you can catch them before the city turns on you. Because a month or two go by, oh, we still haven't caught the serial killer we just announced. And then all it says is like, why haven't you caught him?
Serial killer simply because there is no typical pattern amongst these cases they've seen. The demographics of the victims vary widely. The causes of death are not consistent whatsoever, with a good number of deaths being associated with drowning and drug toxicity and other non-violent means. And on top of this, the police recognize that there is still information that is not known, mainly because a lot of these deaths are still pending a final classification, basically meaning that the cause of death for these bodies that are found is still undetermined. When it comes to
they're that fresh. Oh my God.
true crime stories, it's not necessarily uncommon to have police write off the possibility of there being a serial killer when the evidence is so overwhelming. But in this case, I think the police kind of have a point. Should they be outright denying the possibility of a serial killer?
No.
I don't think so. But at the same time, if all of these deaths were to be the result of a serial killer, this would definitely be a first, as the victims are not really connected in their way. They're young, old, men, women, everything in between. And as the police stated, the causes of death vary. There's no obvious trauma to a lot of these bodies besides drowning. And I guess speaking about information, one of the families of the victims have publicly voiced their frustration with the Houston police specifically, saying that there has been a major lack of transparency and a huge delay in reporting, which to me is a major red flag. Not to even accuse the police whatsoever, but there has just been far too many cases I've covered on this channel and that have just happened generally where the police were obviously negligent and unwilling to accept fault, unfortunately to a killer or criminal's benefit. But yeah, I wanted to discuss this one first and kind of get it out of the way because honestly there is no real information and the authorities don't even believe there is a serial killer. It's more or less of an ongoing conspiracy. But because this is all so new and fresh and, well, popular right now, I thought I would at least mention it. And if you have any sort of information or personal experience, feel free to drop it in the comments. Like I said, this is ongoing, so any information or opinions or insights is at least interesting at this stage. The Sleepy Hollow Killer. This entry is
Sleepy
definitely
Hollow
less speculative
Killer.
than the
Yo, Sleepy Hollow, you be murdering?
Buffalo Bayou Killer we just discussed, although there is not a ton of information available, making it rather short. The Sleepy Hollow Killer refers to a series of serial killings that took place from the 1990s all the way up until 2007. These murders all took place in South Africa, and all of the victims were women, typically sex workers. The Sleepy Hollow murders
And that's what it's like. Being a prostitute is probably like one of the hardest fields of sex work you can possibly do. Because it's like you are going with random emotionally unchecked people. You're going to their hotel, you're getting in their car, and you're just trusting them. It is crazy.
Began happening in the late 1990s, when several women were found assaulted and strangled to death with their own underwear, all within the same city, Peter Maritzburg. All of their bodies were found near the N3 highway, and with all of these shocking similarities, it put the possibility of a serial killer on the police's radar. And it was because of this revelation that in 2001, the authorities actually re-examined some of the victims' bodies to try to find more information. However, that pursuit was rather unfruitful, and for a while, it seemed like the Sleepy Hollow killer was inactive and the cases had gone cold. That was until another string of murders took place in 2007, nearly a decade after the first group of murders. Between February and October of 2007, the bodies of 3 women were found near the N3 highway once again, and all of these victims had been assaulted and strangled in the same manner as the victims from the late 90s. One glaring and shocking difference
You can't
for these
deny
3
that one.
recent murders
That's serial
compared to the
killer.
original murders were the fact that these 3 most recent victims were not only assaulted and killed, but also burned after their death. However, even with this one difference, the police still believe that the murderer is likely linked to the original murders that took place. However, now with numerous victims found, multiple crime scenes, and clear consistencies across the 13 to potentially more than 16 murders, there's still to this day absolutely no convictions and barely even any suspects.
They don't even got a suspect for somebody who did that? Oh my
The only
God.
known suspect as of now was a man who was arrested in 2008 for the murder of a woman that was unrelated. Upon further investigation, authorities on the case said that they believe this individual was not related to the Sleepy Hollow killer. Although it is concerning that there's just so many people like this out there, at least seemingly. With that
Yeah,
being
that's
said, as
very
of now, there has
concerning.
been no more serial killings associated with the Sleepy Hollow killer. Although, due to the fact that all of these murders happened so recently, and there was even another resurgent a decade after the original murders, I would say there's a pretty likely chance that the Sleepy Hollow killer is not only on the loose, but also active to this very day. Or at the very least, dormant and planning their next attack. The Manchester Pusher. Diving directly back into the world of speculation, we have another serial killer that may not even be a serial killer, but I thought it was worth mentioning. The Manchester Pusher is a nickname that's been given to a theorized serial killer allegedly responsible for the deaths of numerous people by pushing them into the waterways of Greater Manchester. Similar to the Buffalo Bayou situation.
That's it? Like, you don't kill them, you just push some niggas into the water? Like, what do you gain from that? That's like being one of those niggas who push people like into the subway because they're standing too close to the rail, to the thing.
People believe that there is a serial killer on the loose because there are simply too many people dying in the same way for this to be just a coincidence. However, the authorities, in this case the Greater Manchester Police, don't buy it and are actually, instead of trying to investigate the situation, trying to actively dispel this. The Manchester Police have even gone as far as saying that the Manchester Pusher is nothing more than an urban legend or a myth. And whether that is or isn't the case, let me give you the facts. People that believe that there is a Manchester Pusher claim that there almost has to be a person behind all of the drownings because of the sheer alarming number of deaths that have taken place in the Manchester canals since the early 2000s.
But like, how do they die in the canals? I mean, I get people can't swim, but like that many people? I don't get it.
Between 2008 and 2016 alone, 85 deaths were recorded in the canals, which is an extremely alarming statistic, although it doesn't necessarily instantly mean there's a serial pusher going around. People that are proponents of the Manchester Pusher theory believe that this potential killer intentionally targets intoxicated young individuals that are standing or hanging out near the canal, ideally when they are alone and away from their friends. At this point, when the Manchester Pusher is alone with his victim, all he needs to do is to simply push this intoxicated individual into the water and allow the rest to just look like a drunk person.
But how do they die just falling into the water though? Is the current strong? Like it just kills them? Or is it like animals that live in there that kill them? I still don't know how they die from just getting pushed in there. Like,
falling in the water and the death seeming accidental. That doesn't necessarily explain any sort of motive, although I don't think it's unrealistic for a serial killer to want to have a way to kill people that seems inconspicuous. Some serial killer experts who have analyzed the facts believe that it's not a serial killer simply because a serial killer wouldn't get their dark satisfaction from simply pushing somebody into the water. They would want to be more involved and in control, and that is believable. Although I I don't think it fully neutralizes the possibility that there is just some sick and twisted individual who gains that dark satisfaction from simply watching someone drown. And whether or not they drowned by accident or because they were intentionally pushed, we don't know the facts yet. Although it is important to note that both authorities and experts do believe that this isn't the actions of an intentional serial killer, but rather an unfortunate coincidence that has been exacerbated by the rise of bars opening on the canals. Now, to throw one wrench into the entire situation though, on April 10th of 2018, a 34-year-old cyclist was intentionally pushed into a canal by an unknown assailant. Not only was the cyclist intentionally pushed into the canal, but as the cyclist was trying to get out of the water, this person kept kicking them back into the water until
Nah, that's some evil shit. That's some evil shit.
this unknown pusher eventually ran away, which gave the cyclist time to get out of the water and catch their breath, although not enough time to catch the person who attempted to take their life. As far as we know right now, this is the only confirmed case of somebody intentionally pushing somebody into the canal for seemingly malicious reasons. But even with this very real situation, the police have gone out of their way to state that there is no evidence to suggest that this has anything to do with the other incidents associated with the Manchester pusher. But once again, that doesn't mean that it's not a possibility. I wanted to put this one last because, like the Buffalo Bayou Killer, it's very speculative and very unconfirmed. But unlike the Buffalo Bayou Killer, this example is a bit more obscure, so hopefully it was still at least interesting. But with that being said, I want to make a really important and serious message. As interesting and educational as these videos are, it's important to note that every single thing I discussed in this video is real. It's not fantasy. These are real cases with real victims, with real people, with real friends, and real families with lives that are either destroyed or lost. And because of that, I truly do try my best to be as respectful as possible when discussing these extremely horrific and unfortunate situations. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to
But nah, he's right though. Like these are real stories. These are real people's lives that they had to go through. A lot of things their families had to endure. So, a lot of people talk about it, make jokes about it, lightheartedly. But at the end of the day, these are real situations. So I just want to say, peace to the fallen. Any jokes were made, they were not made in good, bad faith. Trying to lighten a dark situation. With that being said, that was Serial Killers on the Loose today. Still, part 2. Let me know how y'all feel about that down below. I'll see y'all boys later though.
I'm not trying to score. Your heart's an open door. I got the key. I'm trying to keep composure and some more. I know you want some more. Oh, oh. Can your body hear me? Want you to feel me?